Well, thank you so much for having me here. It actually is not only a true honor. I was really impressed and very happy when the invitation arrived, but it has also been a source of inspiration for me in the past couple of weeks. The invitation came about a month ago or so, because I thought, okay, well, finding hope, avenues for hope, how are we going to do that? So I thought that I will be, as one's trying to live, from one day to the next and try to process reality. I also thought, okay, the methodology I will use to prepare for this is to look at the world from this particular angle of how I can, what should I be talking about when May 30th comes. And I've also asked my friends every now and then, my family, okay, what do you think can come out of this? So what I will do is I will, okay, let me see. Can you see the slides that I have?
Yes.
Okay, so what I will do, I will try to present a random collection of potential sources of optimism, which is very difficult to, most of them are, and I'm pretty sure it's almost impossible to believe in all of them. So I'm very much in a similar position to what Sylvia said, but I think these are potentially there, right? So I'm not even saying I believe in these, but maybe I hope for some of these to happen, and I think they're definitely out there as potentials. Three initial remarks. So, to start with, I guess, a commonplace is that, of course, it's, if a door opens, or if a door closes, another door opens. So, it's often hard to tell disaster from opportunity. It may also be an opportunity for us, if you've been following these initiatives by Hollywood celebrities like Madonna and others, that yes, maybe this is an opportunity for us to not return to what used to be normal a few weeks ago or a few months ago, because that's not necessarily something we want to get back to. The other thing is we really don't know. So just like with the virus, we know very little about it. And of course, as time progresses, the more and more we know about it. But even a month ago, when your kind invitation came for me to talk about this, I actually thought I had a completely different perspective of what I was actually thinking of, how the world is going to be in 2 months, in 5 months, in 2 years. So it's all very much in flux. And I think one of the interesting features of these few weeks or months have been what they refer to as info collapse. And when we know very little, it's very difficult to tell what's relevant, what's not. So it's certainly a very interesting and inspiring time for intellectuals in this regard. And again, in line with what Sylvia said, maybe this is not going to define our future. Maybe it will just expedite some of the trends that have already been out there. So there's a lot of talk about outsourcing, things to IT platforms and stuff. That has been going on for a while, and maybe we'll take us to the next level. But okay, let me get to a couple of, I guess, randomly collected potential features of the pandemic that may be sources for some sort of optimism for the future. One of them, and something that had been inspired from my personal experience, I'm based in Hungary, is that I think, if the crisis, if the health or the pandemic crisis continues, this could be the end of populist autocracies. These regimes are characterized by not only this disruption of constitutional rule of law regimes, but also by corruption, and autocracies usually involve a great deal of incompetence, because in an autocracy, the main feature for any position, whether it's a school director or someone in any policy area, is unquestioned loyalty to the autocratic leader. Now, this may work in peaceful times, but you can't solve issues and challenges with propaganda, intimidation, and the dark psychology that these regimes rely on. So, in a way, a lot of people are in a schizophrenic state of mind in autocracies, because at one point, of course, they're happy that the epidemic hasn't been extremely severe and you don't experience dozens of thousands of deaths around you. But also, a lot of people think that, if this was actually a breaking point, if this was a test point for the regime, this could, okay. The next one, states. Just as, there's a saying that when a plane is about to crash, you don't have atheists on board. Everyone starts to believe in God. It's very, it's very similar in this regard. When you have an epidemic like this, everyone starts to think in big state, right? Also, we think in terms of nationhood. It's always been interesting to me. If there was an earthquake thousands of kilometers from Hungary and another continent, the very first thing that the news will come up whether there was a Hungarian survivor, whether there was a Hungarian victim or not. Now, this has been, what we've seen is that, people tend to think in terms of nationhood and state when issues like this come up. Well, even if you're not necessarily a big friend of big states, if a state is bigger, there's potentially more money for healthcare, social services, education. So that also can be a good point. If you think supranationalism is good, then it may also be a source of potential good news for you. Of course, there is a paradox, and this is something that Sylvia has talked about. There's, we live in a system of globalized interdependence of states, yet there's very little space for an authorization for supranational regulation. So one of the consequences of this would be that maybe this is time to give authorization to the UN, the WHO, whatever, because we're basically in a globalized risk community. The same with the European Union. If you're a friend of EU federalism, then this, of course, then again, it may be something of a potentially good, potential avenue for hope for you. Of course, what we see now is the total crash of the EU. It was, but again, we have people have been burying the EU many times, and also, maybe this is a point of evolution or extinction. Maybe this will lead to a more, powerful move towards federalism, more authorities, extension of the Eurozone, whatever, which again, for those who believe this is a good idea, this may be a source of inspiration. It is actually very interesting to see that, this whole phenomenon of medical nationalism that happened. So, in the first weeks of the crisis, what we've seen is you had German hospitals treating French patients, and it was all this very European issue. And then a couple of days later, the borders were closed down as the EU has never even happened. But at the same time, we have seen Europeanized restrictions on sort of sale and, of medical supplies. There was very limited, but there had been an intra-European cooperation. So again, we'll see where this goes. The same with coral nationalism is a term I've came across, versus global solidarity. We have seen that, yes, borders have been closed down and people have, and the action was limited to nation states, but there was also seen, and maybe this is the way it will further proceed, signs of global solidarity. And again, it can, and this has been the experience of natural disasters and similar phenomena, it can actually trigger greater cooperation internationally. And of course, the economy. So, a lot of talk has been about that for those who don't believe in, those who have been more convinced by the dark side of neoliberalism, this may bring the era of post-neoliberalism. You may have mandatory universal income for working days. These recovery plans may include universal healthcare in countries which did not have that. And there's a likelihood that this will be the end of hyperglobalization, maybe a step towards green economy. Certainly, I think what we and again, this has been mentioned earlier, single source based economy is probably out. Diversification is probably going to be, and shorter chains, less dependence on China, maybe potentially a move from fossil consumption to renewable energies. It's also very interesting what we've seen about the discussion of future of cars. Some say there's going to be less cars, more public transportation, bicycle. In Budapest, the main boulevard has, one of the lanes has been now reserved for bicycles. This is an unprecedented step. Of course, other people are saying that, well, in fact, we are going to have more cars because that's safer, because you don't have, expose yourself to risk of infection, which you would get on public transportation. But then again, they say that maybe those cars will be electric and more green. So we'll see. What's for sure that it's not only going to bring a bigger state, it's also going to be a good business for not only for big tech, but also for everything big, which again may also be good for some people. Again, going back to the idea of of returning or not returning to normal, maybe this is a time to reform travel, big fashion, restaurant industry, and transform it into something more sustainable, less exploitative, maybe safer food standards, for example, in China. So we'll see. This is certainly not something that may not be part of the package. I've been reading some economic analysis, and it's been, showing that even small companies have came to realize that they have much more to offer than they had actually thought. I mean, think about Zoom. Zoom had 10 million customers in January. Now 200 million people are using it per day. And, well, there was a slight data breach issue. But again, these companies these services have been running smoothly. And there's new customer demand, distant medicine, maybe pairing up with artificial intelligence diagnostics. This does open a branch of new directions. We've seen that this is something that e-commerce, e-governance, distant medicine again has received the boom from this. What's really interesting for me as a social scientist and a constitutional lawyer in particular is I have been, but again, we probably don't have a lot of time to talk about this. I'm very much interested in whether this is actually going to bring a change in how human rights and this whole, story is being perceived and what our role is in this. But there has been a very large gap in privacy, in how privacy is seen by lawmakers, by advocates, by human rights advocates, and reality. So the GDPR is basically that my experience as a person and not as an academic working on this field has been a new one. It's been something that has been an irritation for most people. They wouldn't read anything; they'd just be clicking on yes, yes, yes. So at the same time, we have been pushing for much more stronger standards for privacy and data protection, whereas life was going in a different direction. Now, maybe all these, these past couple of months, at least if you look at, how, for example, the German, the limited data on what we have, on how, for example, people in Germany have been reacting to all this. The convenience of online life feels less disturbing to consumers and all these features of digital capitalism and surveillance capitalism. Again, I think I'm not a business expert, but we've seen that also this is what I have been reading, that this is not a bad time to start innovative business. So even though the US, the number of unemployment claims are staggering, this is 40 million people as we speak today. That's like every fourth or fifth member of, working, member of the labor force is actually now unemployed. But at the same time, we still have seen 500,000 employer identifications, so new businesses starting in the US, which is slightly down from last year, but still this is something that, shows that, this is not maybe entirely that bleak. Maybe, I don't necessarily believe in this, but maybe it could be lead to a consolidation of real estate prices. We see we don't know where rent strikes are going, leading in the US, or bankruptcies in this regard, but it may actually change the rules of the game. Same with education. Certainly in the US, we see that a lot less people are willing to pay the same amount of money for an online digitalized higher education. So we will see that this will change the system. Again, what we have seen is that tech helps. We have seen robots and drones delivering. We see, digitalized distant learning, infection tracking devices. Of course, they carry a huge amount of constitutional, ethical, whatever political questions, but still, it has proved that platforms, IT tech platforms are there. They needed, it was a big test, again, to repeat myself, and it worked. One big question I've always been interested in, will ever a new paradigm come in deliberative democracy? We've been aware of, remember Churchill, even Churchill has pointed out more than a half century ago, or actually more than that now, is that, well, democracy is an inherently problematic way to live, except we haven't came up with anything better, anything or a feasible alternative. And everyone's thinking that, well, we have the world, that the digital world has changed everything in the way we live, except for this, the whole sort of the way democracy works. And, maybe this is something that will lead us to a new world of how political participation and decision-making can work out. This is also something Sylvia mentioned. We do see engagement from civil society, especially. It's very interesting if you have if you don't trust the government or your fellow citizens, then it may again be an inspiration for engagement of civil society, of for solidarity and action. I'm not that optimistic in this regard, but we should always bear in mind that maybe this is a, we can have hopes for long-awaited changes in perspective. We could have finally, and this is something that advocates have been arguing about, have a gender sensitive budgeting. When we are designing economic recovery, maybe this is time to actually try to implement things that people have been talking about for a long time. Just as to bring an example, a parallel with the Hurricane Katrina way back, that actually has brought a more ethno-racial justice awareness. I'm not saying it's happening. I mean, if we look at what's going on in Minnesota, we're not saying that this process has been very successful, but the perspective has changed a bit. I think awareness has been raised again. So maybe this is something, there has been some talk about, for example, the Roma, in the EU, maybe, economic recovery should have a more sort of mainstream focus on marginalized people. And again, we have seen that we have, again, when we talk about perspectives, maybe the focus is going to be more clear on, we've seen that how gender-based violence, domestic violence, FGM have happened during the lockdown. So maybe this is something that there will be more attention when the economic recovery will be implemented, because there's going to be an economic crisis. So maybe there will be more attention for unpaid care work, survival sex, and even controversial issues we probably don't have time to talk about it now, such as like sex or race-based medicine. Okay, a little bit, and again, this is somewhat of a random collection of issues. The media, the social media, this has been, as they say, if there was a war, if there is a war going on with the virus, the war is actually taking places in closed settings, hospital rooms. This is where people are fighting for their lives, and the media, social media, has played a very important role in incentivizing, in preparing people to act, to bring attention to the threats. And what we've seen is that actually, things that have been talked about in relation of social media, for example, how to tackle fake news, hate speech, etc. These issues have been, there have been significant steps to deal with these issues. I'm not saying that these are necessarily, successful or we can measure the success of this. For example, consider, Facebook's Supreme Court, so to speak, this new body that will oversight the complaints. So this is something that we do see, I would say, historical and groundbreaking developments of how social media works. Okay, I'll be finished soon. One thing is for sure is that some features will stay. So there is definitely going to be some innovations that will be with us, that this pandemic has triggered. Distant learning is definitely going to be around. One of my Hungarian private high school, for example, said that, of course, they're not going to move to full distant learning, but they're definitely going to have at least one day for the graduating senior, class of, at least one day of distant learning, because they think it's good. It actually helps. Home office, usually what they said, I don't know how reliable these numbers are, that about 4% of this sort of this white collar office work has been done remotely before the pandemic, whereas according to experts, it could be up to 37%, right? So maybe we'll, again, presuming that that's a good thing. So distant medicine, that certainly is going to have, certainly will have some positive side effects. And some of these can bring more equality. Despite there is a digital divide, sometimes this actually counterbalances traditional inequalities. Just give you one example. It is something a friend of mine was telling me. She's a psychologist, and of course, as a psychologist, you have to go through all these on-the-job trainings and have courses in order to keep your license. Now, all these trainings have been in Budapest, which is, Budapest in this regard is very similar to Bratislava in Slovakia. Everything is there. It's the over-dominant location, yet it takes a lot of it poses a burden on people, professionals who don't live in the city to go there to, if they can do it distantly, it is actually a form of equality. Again, the US, just again, random example, there has been a long-going debate whether the US Supreme Court should have open hearings and whatnot. Now, for the first time, they started broadcasting it. Even temporarily, there are some things, better air. You can see Mount Everest from Kathmandu. You can see the pyramids from Cairo, flamingos, appearing. Well, we probably shouldn't think that this is going to last, but at least for a while, it is, Okay, another thing, again, this is being a random collection of issues, smaller prison population. Maybe this is the time for those countries, especially the US, but not only, to rethink mass incarceration. Social costs have been repeatedly called on by advocates. Now we've seen that this is a public health risk, right? So we've seen radical measures happening in the US. San Francisco reduced its prison population by 40%. New Jersey had 1,000 detainees released per week. So police departments were issuing fewer arrests, especially material witness warrants. Anyway, I can come back to this in the Q&A. One potential, I don't really believe in this, but again, one potential positive outcome of this could be less anti-intellectualism, which is something that's very popular and it's a good political strategy, but with the role of, scientists and sort of academics and trying to forecast the future, which of course is not usually what scientists do, because scientists usually work on the present. But anyway, this may be a positive effect. This is my last slide, I think. Yeah. So I will finish soon. Okay, there's a couple of mundane things. I mean, think about, for example, a better office space, the clean desk policy and these cubicles that millions of white-collar middle-class workers' lives have been around. This is probably not going to last for long. Masks may bring a new inspiration for fashion. Trying to think of positive side effects. More, or dental hygiene is probably increasing. I read an article, more Listerine had been sold. Okay. A revival of open air drive-in movies and, concerts. So again, generally, I think, and this is, of course, what they say is generally we can expect less bullshit, right? So useless meetings that, were called, unnecessarily could just be either not held or held online. So generally and again, this may or may not be a good thing, is that cutting the non-essential stuff may be mainstream. So you can cut non-essential travel and consumption and all that. Okay, last thing, on a personal level, personal people, a lot of people, of course, those, I guess, lucky ones who have had a family where they were living, where they're, it may actually be a source of a good memory for children. They get to spend more time, unless, of course, their parents were fighting, and of course, they were facing all these hardships. I'm not saying this is applicable for everyone, but it could actually be a source of of good memory for a lot of people. People get time to watch more movies, more books if they were interested in that. There have been some studies that, more housework has been done by men. I'm not sure, question how long that's going to last. But I think what also, and we'll see, time will bring whether this is actually true or not and what the impact of this, but we have seen that, new forms of empowerment for people on a personal level, people have seen that they have resources that they were probably not even aware of. In times of losing control, they have learned to cope with situations. Baking, we had this epidemic of showing pictures on Facebook of how people were baking bread. This is something you can take control of something you thought you did not have control. And one last thing, is I think, and again, we'll see whether this actually has a long-lasting impact, is that this was, I think, a unique time for us, for my generation and your generation, is people have been facing another form of personal public responsibility, something that is, how do you behave publicly? Are you going to wear a mask? Are you going to be doing social distancing? It's much more direct than, say, how you react to climate change. Are you going to recycle? Are you going to not use straws or plastic forks? This is something more direct, and of course not as personal as the responsibility you have towards your family members. So we'll see. And really, lastly, I think it has been a time for people to tell apart the important and from the less important. I think people have reevaluated lots of things in life, which you do in peril, who you call, who are your friends, who are the people and things that are important for your life. This is something that people do in times of a crisis. So so again, this is something that may have potentially positive impact for us. We'll see. Thank you.